For days earlier, I still believed my life was exactly what it looked like on the surface. A steady marriage. A loyal friend. A future that made sense. That illusion shattered in less than 10 seconds. It started with a phone call I was never supposed to hear. I had been driving back from a late lesson with one of my students. Defensive driving classes kept me on the road a lot, and that night the mountain route was almost empty. Just darkness, winding asphalt, and the hum of my engine cutting through the cold air. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat. Lisa's name lit up the screen. I smiled when I answered. That was still normal back then. Still easy. But the moment I picked up, I realized something was wrong. She wasn't talking to me. Her voice sounded distant, like the phone had been answered inside her purse. Tomorrow night, she was saying. Then a man's voice replied. Derek. My best friend. I remember slowing the car without realizing it. My foot eased off the gas while my brain tried to make sense of what I was hearing. Their voices were relaxed. Comfortable. The way people talk when they've had the same conversation 100 times before. Are you sure everything's ready? Lisa asked quietly. Derek laughed. Relax. Once the car goes over the edge, it'll look like another mountain road accident. Happens all the time. There was a short pause. Then Lisa said something that turned my blood to ice. And the insurance? Already confirmed, Derek replied. Once everything clears, you'll be looking at $3 million. $3 million. My life insurance policy. The same one Lisa had insisted we get 2 years earlier because she said it would help us feel secure about the future. For a few seconds, I genuinely believed I was misunderstanding something. Maybe they were talking about someone else. Maybe it was a joke. Maybe. Then Derek said my name. Clear. Calm. Casual. By this time tomorrow, Nathan won't be a problem anymore. I don't remember pulling the car to the side of the road. I only remember the silence after the call disconnected. Cold air pouring through the open window. My hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. 7 years of marriage. 11 years of friendship. Both collapsing in a single moment. But even then, I still didn't fully believe it. Because when the people you trust most betray you, your mind fights the truth. It searches for excuses. For explanations. For anything that makes the world feel normal again. So the next morning, I did something incredibly stupid. I followed my normal routine. I got into my car. And I drove up that mountain road exactly like I had 100 times before. I didn't check the brakes. I didn't question anything. Because a part of me still believed the people I loved wouldn't actually try to kill me. That was my second mistake. By the time Raymond helped me into the passenger seat of his truck, the sun was barely above the horizon. The morning air was cold enough to sting my lungs, and every bump in the road sent a dull shock through my ribs. Raymond didn't start the engine right away. He just sat there with his hands on the wheel, staring out through the windshield. You got proof? He finally asked. More than enough, I said. He nodded once. That was the thing about my brother. Raymond never wasted words. Growing up, if someone crossed a line, he didn't shout about it. He just remembered. And eventually, he handled it. The truck rolled out of the hospital parking lot slowly. For the first 10 minutes, neither of us spoke. My body was screaming from the effort of simply sitting upright, but the pain helped keep my mind sharp. I needed sharp. Because what came next couldn't involve mistakes. Raymond finally broke the silence. So what's the plan? I leaned my head back against the seat and watched the gray morning slide past the window. They think I'm dying, I said. Raymond glanced at me. Yeah. They're waiting for the insurance payout. He grunted softly. Figures. I turned my head toward him. So we let them keep thinking that. That got his attention. Raymond slowed slightly at a stop sign and looked over. Explain. I took a slow breath, careful not to shift my ribs too much. Right now they believe the accident is working. Derek already told Lisa to keep it together until everything clears. Raymond's jaw tightened at Derek's name. I continued. If I suddenly start moving around, asking questions, pushing police, they'll panic. They'll cover their tracks. Destroy things. So you stay quiet, Raymond said. Exactly. The truck rolled onto the highway heading toward his place. They're celebrating right now, I added. Thinking the problem is solving itself. Raymond gave a humorless chuckle. Wouldn't be the first time idiots celebrated too early. I closed my eyes for a moment as another wave of pain rolled through my side. But we're not rushing this, I said. Gerald is building the legal side. The investigator is digging into Derek. Bank records, travel, everything. And us? Raymond asked. We wait. He nodded slowly. That might sound passive to some people. It wasn't. Waiting is one of the hardest things a person can do when someone has tried to kill them. Every instinct in your body wants immediate confrontation. Shouting. Violence. Something loud and explosive. But the cold clarity I'd felt in that hospital room hadn't gone away. If anything, it had grown sharper. Because Derek and Lisa didn't just betray me. They planned my death. They calculated the money they'd get from it. They stood beside my hospital bed pretending to care while discussing how long it might take for me to stop breathing. People like that don't deserve a dramatic argument. They deserve consequences. Raymond pulled into his driveway and cut the engine. Before getting out, he turned to face me fully. "You want them arrested," he said. "Or ruined first?" I met his eyes. Both. A slow, grim smile crossed his face. "Good," he said. Then he opened the door and stepped out into the morning. Raymond stepped up beside me just inside the doorway while the silence in the room stretched tighter and tighter. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. 14 people stood frozen between the living room and kitchen, glasses halfway to their lips, trying to understand why a man they believed was fighting for his life was suddenly standing in the middle of a dinner party. Derek still hadn't recovered enough to close the door. He just stood behind me, breathing hard. Lisa's fingers slowly loosened around her champagne glass. It trembled slightly in her hand. "Nathan," she whispered again. I unfolded the papers in my hand calmly. The rustle of the pages sounded louder than it should have. "I'll keep this simple," I said. A few guests exchanged uneasy glances. One of the couples I'd known for years stepped back slightly, like instinct was telling them something ugly was about to surface. This gathering, I continued, holding up the documents, was organized under the assumption that I wouldn't be alive to attend. Derek finally found his voice. "Okay, what the hell is this?" he snapped, trying to laugh it off. "Nathan, you're clearly on pain medication or something. Maybe you should?" "Derek." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't even look angry. But the way I said his name stopped him cold. "You searched brake sabotage techniques on your laptop on March 3rd, I said evenly. 3 separate searches. 2 of them specifically about cutting hydraulic lines. A ripple of confusion moved through the room. Someone lowered their drink slowly. Derek's face went rigid. "That's ridiculous," he said quickly. "You can't just." And 2 days later, I continued, my car lost brake pressure halfway down Ridge Pass. Now the room wasn't confused anymore. It was uneasy. The kind of quiet that comes when people start realizing they're standing inside something serious. Lisa stepped forward a little. "Nathan, stop," she said softly. "You're hurt. You're not thinking clearly." I turned toward her. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then I pulled another sheet from the folder. 26 months, I said. Her breath caught. "That's how long the affair lasted." Someone near the kitchen whispered, "What?" Derek looked around quickly, the confident host from earlier completely gone. "This is insane," he said. "He's making things up." "No," I said calmly. I held up a printed page. A message sent from Lisa's phone. The room watched me. I read the line out loud. "Are you sure he won't notice before the mountain road?" Lisa went completely still. And Derek's response, I continued, reading from the next line, "He won't know until it's too late." The words landed in the room like something heavy dropping onto the floor. One of the guests muttered, "Jesus." Lisa shook her head quickly. "Nathan, you're twisting." "Brake lines," I said quietly. I lowered the papers and looked directly at her. "You asked him about the brake lines." Her mouth opened. But nothing came out. Across the room, a woman slowly set her glass on the counter like she suddenly didn't trust her hands anymore. Derek's voice came out sharp and desperate. "You went through her phone? That's your defense? You're spying on your wife and now." "You're right," I said. That surprised him. "I did go through it." I looked around the room at the stunned faces. 2 years of messages, I said. Planning an affair. Planning a future together. Then I lifted the final page. And planning my death. No one spoke. Not a single person. Lisa's shoulders started to shake slightly. Derek stared at the floor like he was calculating something. And that's when I heard the sound outside. Car doors. Several of them. Then footsteps approaching the house. I folded the papers slowly. "You ordered 2 cases of champagne for tonight," I said to Derek. His head snapped up. "You invited friends to celebrate." The door behind us opened. 2 detectives stepped inside. Uniformed officers followed. The room filled with the heavy, unmistakable presence of law enforcement. I took one small step to the side so they could pass. "But the celebration," I said quietly, "is going to be a little different than you planned." The civil case dragged on for months after the criminal trial ended. Lawyers filed motions. Bank records were examined. Every shared asset was pulled apart and examined under a microscope. It was a strange process, watching the life you built with someone turn into columns on legal documents. House value. Joint accounts. Investments. Furniture. Even the car that had nearly killed me became part of the evidence list. Gerald handled most of it, so I didn't have to sit in those rooms any more than necessary. He had a calm way of navigating legal storms that made people underestimate him until it was too late. One afternoon he slid a stack of papers across the table toward me. "That's the final property division," he said. I looked down at the numbers for a moment. The house was being sold. The joint accounts were frozen and redistributed through the court. The hidden account Derek had opened with Lisa's name on it had been seized as evidence of financial conspiracy. None of it felt like victory. Just the closing of another door. Gerald leaned back slightly. "You handled this better than most people would have," he said. "I'm not sure that's true." He gave a small shrug. "Most people would have tried to settle it in the parking lot with a tire iron." I almost smiled at that. "But you didn't," he added. "You let the system work." Outside the courthouse, the afternoon sun felt unusually warm. Raymond was waiting on the steps like he had been for most of the major hearings. He stood up when I came out. "Done?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. He nodded once. That was all the ceremony the moment really needed. Recovery came slowly after that. My ribs healed first. The brace eventually came off my leg. Physical therapy helped me get my balance back, both literally and figuratively. I returned to teaching defensive driving a few months later. The first time I sat behind the instructor's seat again, my hands lingered on the dashboard for a second longer than usual. The mountains outside the training route looked exactly the same as they always had. But I wasn't the same man driving through them. One evening after a long day of lessons, I stopped at a small diner on the edge of town. The place was quiet, the kind of spot where nobody asks too many questions. The waitress poured coffee and asked how my day had been. "Good," I said honestly. "Not perfect. Not easy. But good. Because life after betrayal isn't about dramatic revenge or perfect closure. It's about rebuilding ordinary days. One quiet morning at a time. Raymond still calls every Sunday. Clara still insists I come over for dinner at least once a week. And sometimes when we sit at that kitchen table, we don't even talk about what happened anymore. It's just family, food, and the comfortable silence of people who know each other well. And that, I've learned, is worth more than any insurance policy someone might try to collect." Not finished. Healing doesn't arrive like a switch flipping from one position to another. It's quieter than that. Gradual. Almost invisible while it's happening. But standing there in the cool morning air, I realized something important. For the first time in months, my mind had chosen something ordinary. Not survival. Not betrayal. Not revenge. Just the rhythm of my feet on the path and the light filtering through the trees. That was the moment I understood I was moving forward. Not perfectly. Not quickly. But forward. I started running that park trail more often after that morning. It became part of my routine. Work during the day, a run in the evening or early morning, dinner at Raymond and Clara's house when they insisted I come by. Life slowly rebuilt itself around those small habits. The strange thing about rebuilding is that it doesn't feel dramatic. It feels simple. You buy new furniture. You learn which grocery store is closest to your apartment. You find the best coffee shop within walking distance. You start recognizing the same people at the park each morning. Ordinary pieces of life stacking back together. About a year after everything happened, I was finishing a driving lesson with a new student, a nervous teenager who gripped the steering wheel like it might escape if she loosened her hands. When we pulled back into the parking lot, she looked over at me. "You're really calm," she said. "Even when I almost hit that curb earlier." I smiled a little. "That's the job." She studied me for a second. "My mom said you were in a really bad accident once," she said cautiously. "Word travels in small communities." I nodded. "Yeah," I said. "Did it scare you from driving?" I thought about that question for a moment. About the mountain road. About the hospital. About the night I knocked on Derek's door and watched two people realize their plan had failed. Then I shook my head. "No," I said. "What did it do then?" she asked. I rested my arm casually on the door frame and looked out at the road stretching beyond the lot. "It reminded me," I said, "that you can't control everything that happens." She frowned slightly, waiting for the rest. "But you can control how you respond when it does." She considered that quietly. Then she nodded, like it made sense. We switched seats so she could get out of the car. As I drove home that evening, the sky was turning orange over the city, and the park below my apartment was filling with people walking dogs and pushing strollers. Normal life. The kind I once thought I had lost forever. When I parked and stepped out, I paused for a second and looked around. There were no champagne glasses. No secrets. No plans whispered in the dark. Just the quiet sound of the wind moving through the trees. And for the first time in a long time, that was more than enough. But she didn't ask for details. That was one of the first things I noticed about Rachel. Some people hear a story like mine and immediately lean forward, curious about the drama, the betrayal, the courtroom moments. They want the whole narrative, every sharp edge of it. Rachel didn't do that. She knew the outline, and that seemed to be enough for her. Instead, she asked about things that belonged to the present. What books I liked. Why I chose defensive driving as a career. Whether the park near my apartment was actually as nice as I had described it. Small things. Normal things. And I found that I appreciated that more than I expected. We met for dinner a few times over the following months. Sometimes coffee, sometimes a walk through the park near my place. There was no rush to define anything. No pressure. Just two people gradually learning who the other person was. One evening we were walking along the path while the sun was setting behind the trees. Rachel stopped near a bench and watched a couple of kids chasing each other across the grass. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Sure." She turned slightly toward me. "Are you always this careful with people now?" The question wasn't accusing. Just curious. I thought about it before answering. "Yes," I said finally. She nodded slowly. "That makes sense." Then she added, almost casually, "Careful doesn't have to mean closed." That line stayed with me longer than she probably realized. Because she was right. What had happened to me had changed the way I moved through the world. Trust wasn't something I handed over automatically anymore. It was something built slowly, piece by piece. But that didn't mean the door was locked. Just reinforced. Months later, on a quiet Sunday afternoon, Rachel came over to my apartment for the first time. The windows were open, letting in the sound of the park below. She walked through the living room, looking at the shelves and the simple furniture. "You really did start over," she said. "I needed to." She stood by the window for a moment, watching people walking along the trail outside. "It's peaceful here," she said. I leaned against the kitchen counter and followed her gaze. "Yeah," I said. For a while neither of us spoke. And the quiet between us didn't feel empty. It felt comfortable. Which, after everything that had happened, might have been the most surprising part of all. Because the truth is, surviving something like that doesn't turn you into a different person overnight. You don't suddenly become fearless or wise or permanently strong. What it does is teach you something simpler. That life keeps moving. And if you're willing to keep moving with it, slowly, carefully, honestly, there are still good things waiting on the other side of the worst days you've ever lived through. A year changes more than people expect. Not in dramatic, movie-style transformations, but in quiet adjustments that happen one ordinary day at a time. Rachel and I kept building what we had started. Carefully. Honestly. She never tried to fix what had happened to me, and she never treated me like something fragile that needed constant protection. That balance mattered more than I can explain. When I eventually told her the full story, every part of it, she listened the same way she always did. Calmly. Thoughtfully. Asking the kind of questions that showed she understood what mattered and what didn't. She had her own history, her own losses. Neither of us came into it pretending life was simple. And strangely enough, that made what we built stronger. Because it wasn't based on illusions. It was based on two people choosing each other with their eyes open. One Sunday evening, about a year after the night everything collapsed, I sat on the small balcony outside my apartment. Raymond and Clara had just left with the kids after dinner. The sound of the city was settling into that quiet rhythm Sundays have: fewer cars, softer voices, lights flicking on in apartment windows across the park. My coffee had gone cold on the table beside me. I leaned back in the chair and thought about the man I had been years earlier. The version of me who had believed his life was simple. A loyal marriage. A lifelong friend. A future that followed a straight, predictable line. For a long time after the crash, I wondered if that man had been naive. If trusting people that completely had been a kind of weakness. But sitting there that night, I realized something different. That version of me wasn't foolish. He had loved honestly. He had trusted the people closest to him because that's what trust is supposed to look like. The betrayal didn't erase that. It only revealed what kind of people Derek and Lisa had chosen to become. Their decisions belonged to them. The consequences belonged to them too. Somewhere across the state, Derek was deep into the first stretch of a 14-year sentence. Lisa had years ahead of her as well. The champagne they bought for that party, the one meant to celebrate my death, was probably still sitting in an evidence locker somewhere, tagged and catalogued like any other piece of proof. A celebration scheduled 11 days too early. I picked up the cold coffee and finished it anyway. The air outside carried the smell of rain moving in from the west. I had a full week ahead of me. Driving classes to teach. A run planned for the morning if the weather stayed clear. Dinner with Rachel later in the week. Normal things. Simple things. The kind of life people often overlook until they nearly lose it. I sat there a few minutes longer watching the city lights blink on one by one across the skyline. Then I stood up, carried the empty mug inside, and closed the balcony door behind me. And for the rest of that night, I didn't think about them at all.